All right, so now moving to item 14, and apologies to external people in the room that we're running approximately 7 minutes behind where I expected we would be at this stage. But this is item 14, the loan application, Canterbury Cricket Trust. Now, John, you're presenting this for council. We do have members of the Canterbury Cricket Trust in the room if there are questions for them. Also noting that Tim Scandaris has now declared a conflict on this matter as a result of his association with VBase, the fact that he's on the board of VBase, and realising that the attachment to this report is in public excluded. So if we get to a point where we are needing to ask questions on or discuss material which is contained in that attachment, that would necessitate us to move into a public excluded session in order to do that. So that kind of sets the scene for where we're at. John, welcome to the table. Thank you very much. Are there any comments that you would like to make as we move into discussing this report?
Yes. This is a loan application for a loan to allow the installation of floodlights in time to host a leading role in the Women's Cricket World Cup. A leading role is essentially hosting the final and a number of other knockout games. It's not about supporting floodlights per se, and it's not about the process in which the council and various other parties has been through to get to this point. The recommendation is that the council grant a loan of up to $1.5 million for the installation of floodlights in order to host the leading role in the Women's Cricket World Cup. It's conditional upon the Trust confirming that they have raised at least $1 million. It's conditional upon confirmation that Christchurch will in fact host this leading role, and obviously to do that they will need the floodlights installed. It's also conditional on the council getting a security or a guarantee on terms and conditions acceptable to the council that the loan will be repaid in full on time on or before the due date. This is different from that council will get security, so if there's a default we'll be able to recover. That's not the purpose of the guarantee. The guarantee that we are recommending to this committee is a guarantee that the loan will be repaid in full and on time. The conditions of the loan are that all of council's costs in approving the loan, albeit on a conditional basis, are covered. Namely, on charging interest at 20 basis points above council's cost to borrow, and on charging the costs within the council itself of producing the loan documentation. So we'd like to give an assurance to the committee that the ratepayer will not undertake any costs as a result of this that will not be repaid. I've been asked to provide a little bit of contextual information to the committee. And what I'd like to do is present that succinctly and then be available with Ian and myself and members of the Trust to answer any questions. As you've said, there is some information provided in a publicly excluded document. And if any questions on those will have to go into obviously public excluded. Some questions around the history of the Trust's fundraising. Excuse me, I'll just get in here. They came up in a deputation this morning, commenting on the fact that primarily the Trust have relied on government agencies and big funding institutions for funding to date. Yep, that's pretty accurate, and that aligns with the officer's assessment. In particular, a write-off of a loan from Sport New Zealand. The information I have is that yes, the makeup of the trust's funding to raise $10 million for the pavilion, as presented, was reasonably accurate. A $3 million underwrite was provided from Sport New Zealand in 2014 to allow the development to be complete in order to host the 2015 Cricket World Cup. $1 million was raised by the trust to reduce that underwrite to $2 million. The trust raised $1.6 million in cash contributions from the sport of cricket, the community of cricket, by December 2014, in anticipation of utilising the funds to pay the remaining $2 million required by Sport New Zealand by the due date. Sport New Zealand, unsolicited by the trust, I understand, in recognition of the trust raising 1.6 million, forgave the loan. I think it's fair to say that in officer's opinion, the trust do have a good record of balancing their books and meeting their obligations. Some information was provided this morning indicating that a Give a Little page had raised approximately $3,000 and a lot more was required. The response is officers understand that the trust have raised approximately $1.3 million and can verify that. That's great, but in order to mitigate this risk that the trust might not be able to raise sufficient money, one of the conditions of the loan is that the trust prove that they have raised in excess of $1 million. So we have a condition that protects council. There has been some feedback through a deputation this morning that the trust's financial position on a year-to-year basis is not as robust as presented by the staff in the assessment, and rather than me commenting on that, I'm shortly going to invite the trust treasurer to comment. The nature of the guarantee required by the council for any loan was commented on. Specifically, it's inappropriate to use an asset of the trust on a council reserve as security. Absolutely right. The guarantee sought will be a guarantee that the loan will be repaid on time according to its conditions, not that if there's a default, council have got something that it can occupy or trade or whatever. So the risk of a security raised this morning is accepted, and there's a condition on the loan that we're recommending which will directly reduce council's risk. A comment was made this morning that the trust in 2013 had previously said, look, no more funding will be required. I've looked at this. The recommendation today is a loan fully repayable at no cost to the council or the ratepayer. It's for floodlights to secure an international event, and it's 7 years since that commitment for no further funding was made. So, in my assessment, I'm assessing a loan application, not a grant. It's fully repayable and guaranteed. So, I'm not sure of the relevance of the no more funding point. I won't be too much longer. There was a concern expressed this morning that council conditionally approving a loan when there's no lease in place might pose council at risk. I'm pleased to announce that the council has issued a lease, and that was received by the trust on the 3rd of March. So that lease has been granted, it has been approved, it has been authorised and sent to the trust, and look, in terms of, we'll certainly ask to verify that, but I understand that that has happened. There was a concern raised this morning around the council approving a conditional loan, primarily around VBase as a council-controlled organisation operating the facilities. I'd just like to provide an assurance to this committee that VBase were in no way involved at any time in either the loan application or the assessment thereof. It was done in exactly the same way as council officers would assess any loan application. There's been a point made that the Civic Trust have asked the Regulations Committee to review the decision made by the Minister to make provision in the district plan for the lights under section 71, and that council should not be considering a loan application until the result of that review is known. Again, to mitigate this risk, the risk being that the Minister might, that the Parliament might ask the Minister to change the resolution. The risk is probably quite small. Notwithstanding this, the loan application that before us, and the recommendation is that the loan be granted upon the council, upon Christchurch being granted a leading role in the Cricket World Cup, on the installation of floodlights, and with a guarantee that the loan will be repaid. So I think we won't be advancing the money if there are no floodlights. We will not be advancing the money if we don't have the final of the Cricket World Cup. We won't get the final of the Cricket World Cup unless there are floodlights. Over and above, there will be a guarantee in place before we advance the loan that the loan will be repaid. So I think there's sufficient protection within the recommendation to mitigate the concern expressed. Lastly, the Civic Trust asked that the council refer this to the Auditor General to check on the process and make a recommendation on whether the loan should be approved or not. The advice that we're providing on that is that, look, no, we can see no reason why the council or this committee would wish to do that. We don't do it with our other loans. We are empowered to do this. It's something that council does. A lease has been granted. There's been a very thorough examination in an open session of council over this matter. The loan has a number of conditions to protect the council, and one of the grounds for maybe pausing the granting of a lease has recently been satisfied. There has been a substantial amount of money raised to date, and there are really quite robust conditions in place. I've probably talked for long enough. If councillors would like any further information, particularly on the financial status of the trust and any other questions, Ian, from a legal point of view, members of the trust or myself are happy to answer. Apologies for the length.
That's all right, and it's all been useful information. I had a list of questions and I've managed to cross a number of them off the list as a result of the information you've provided, so thank you for that. There was some question in the deputation, or some suggestion, that there might be future forgiveness of the loan. You've obviously made it very clear that that's not the intention and it's not framed in that way.
No.
But if that was the case, it would require a decision of the elected council to do that, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
Thank you. Similarly, given the clarity and the robustness of the resolutions that are in front of us, if there were any changes to the conditions or any request for removal of any of the conditions, given that if we pass this resolution, they will be by council resolution, it would require a further resolution of council to change or remove any of those conditions?
Yes.
Thank you. The decision process on whether any guarantee is to the satisfaction of council.
Yep.
The way that this resolution is framed, that's delegated to the Head of Community Support, Governance and Partnerships, and noting that documentation obviously will be reviewed by Council's Financial Management and Legal Services units. That's the basis on which Council, the organisation, determines that the 2A conditions acceptable to the Council, has been met.
Yes, it is. There are a number of standard conditions within council loan agreements. There are also a number of very specific conditions in this report that we're seeking a committee resolution of them. Council officers put together the loan documentation. They are reviewed by both Council's financial management team and Council's legal services unit. And myself, in exactly the same way, we would review the terms and conditions of any other similar loan granted by the Council. If all of those terms and conditions are satisfied, we would proceed. If the committee felt that due to the complexity of this matter, an additional level of verification was required, I'd probably naturally go to the Chief Financial Officer to seek that. If there were any questions or any discussions around conditions being fulfilled or not, I'd be discussing it with the Chief Financial Officer.
So if, given the pivotal nature, or some may view Resolution 2A as being quite pivotal to ensuring that the ratepayers of the city are not put at any risk over this transaction, this committee, had the view that it wanted oversight of that. It would be possible for 2A to be referred back to this committee for a decision if that was felt necessary.
Or delegated to the chair of committee.
Yeah.
Or delegated to, maybe chair and deputy chair.
Yeah. I won't reiterate what the Chief Executive said, because it's exactly what I was going to say. Rather than waiting 6 weeks for a cycle of a committee meeting, I'd delegate to the chair and deputy chair.
Yeah, all right, that's useful, and some may find that useful, that's great. And then the final question relates to the matter that was raised as regards Council's ownership of VBase. And John, you made some comment on that. But I think just looking at the deputation, the suggestion really was that Council's ownership of VBase and VBase being the operator of the facility gave rise to a conflict in itself if the installation of lights and the facilitation of that was seen to benefit VBase in some way. Ian, I don't know whether that's a question that you can answer in this arena or not.
I'll try. Yes, it's a factor, but I think as John mentioned before, VBase hasn't been involved in any way at all with the discussions or negotiations around the application for the loan. So I think the risk of there being an issue with that is relatively low, and I wouldn't see it as a showstopper.
And I guess that comes back to the point that John made at the very beginning of his presentation, which is that this is a paper about the granting of a loan rather than a paper about the installation of floodlights.
Yeah. I'd probably add that of approximately 135 days of cricket at all levels on the facility, VBase have a commercial interest in very few days at the higher performance end of the spectrum. The vast majority of the operation of the facility on a day-to-day basis is either the council's parks team, Canterbury Cricket and the Cricket Trust going about their regular cricketing purposes.
All right, thank you. Further questions? Catherine.
Hi, thanks so much for that report. It says here that the interest would be repaid at regular intervals during the 4-year term. Just wondering if we've got confirmed source of payment for that, for those payments during those intervals, and how frequently would they be?
The frequency would be annually. We would invoice for the repayments, and of course they'd be covered by the guarantee. Have I answered your question?
I guess my question was more so around, so the yearly interest payments would be around 67.5, say for example.
Yeah.
Because my understanding would be the guarantee would be covering, it'd be something for us to be able to fall back on at the end of the 4-year term should they not be able to repay the loan in full and the interest in full.
Yeah.
My question was what the source of repayments, or what the source of payments would be for the yearly interest payments.
The yearly interest payments will come from the trust, and we can ask the trust members that they've got the financial capacity to repay those, and that might be a segue to invite the trust to talk about their financial stability and ability to make those payments, as you said, $60,000 to $70,000 on an annual basis.
Yeah.
So that might be better that they answer that rather than myself.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yep, that's
With your
fantastic. If
permission, Mr. Chair.
the question is about ability to pay, what we're looking for is a level of confidence from the trust, and I'd certainly invite the trust to answer that question.
Thank you, councillors. I'm more than happy to answer any questions in relation to that and the other matters. Preliminarily, we are very comfortable with those conditions. As a solicitor, I deal every day with conditions of loans, guarantees, securities, and we have no issues working through those conditions. In terms of cash flow, in the last 2 years, the Trust, from its own cash reserves, has met payment for consultancy fees in respect of the upgrade and resource consents and other matters relating to the Hagley Sports Centre of something like $140,000 to $150,000. In the last 2 years, the last 18 months, it has spent some $260,000 on consultants' fees from its own funds, its own cash flow, in respect to the resource consent and associated ministers, regeneration process, variation of lease process that we've just gone through. In the last 4 months, we've had 60 more members join the Pavilion Club. Our income has been regular and satisfactory. We have $500,000 in reserves in our bank account. And I'd like to comment later, if I may, on the rather distressing submission made by Mr Carswell about the inability to meet our obligations. They are defamatory comments. We have met all our loan and other obligations from the date of inception. And I will talk at length about the underwrite which was gratuitously given to us by Sport New Zealand after we had raised 90% of the funds for the money that they had lent us. Trevor Thornton, as our Treasurer, might want to elaborate on the funding issues and the cash flow that you have raised.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, councillors. The financial statements of the Canterbury Cricket Trust are on the charity's website. Key to the operation of this trust is the cash flow, and there'll be a number of people that understand that, because we spend $400,000 on depreciation, and also Lee's elaborated on the number of expenses that we've incurred in terms of getting the application to where it is today. That's the Section 71 application. In 2018, we had a cash reduction of $194,000, but we spent $200,000 on the cricket precinct at Hagley Oval, where we are upgrading the sports centre to enhance the facility. So we are using some of our proceeds to enhance the capital nature of ours. Last year it was $17,000, which I effectively call a break-even situation. To put in place the application for the loan, we went to a major 6 accounting firm, and I have consolidated financial statements integrated through to 2030 that show how we're going to do this, and this has been presented to the Christchurch City Council. There are numerous income sources, including membership, the pavilion rental, hospitality, recovering of insurance, and a whole host of other activities that we're involved in. So the integrated cash flow through to 2030 shows that we can meet our obligations, and that is our intention. And we currently have, as Lee just said, $500,000 in the bank account to meet our current commitments and underway. And of course, we have a Christchurch benefactor that we have sourced to give us $1 million towards these lights. So we are making strong progress in terms of meeting our obligations, and we are well aware of what we have to do to repay the loan and what we have to do to meet the interest and other obligations that the Trust has. We've got our financials and presented them to the Council in support of this application.
Thank you. Are there further questions? So Sam and then Melanie. Sam.
Thank you, Trevor, and the team. I mean, you've answered it largely, but I just wondered, John, whether at some stage we could see that cash flow, because my question was around effectively the ability to repay the 1.5, and I can't find it in here. So
I can circulate that.
yeah, that would be quite
Yeah.
useful.
Absolutely, Sam.
Yeah.
I can talk to that. Right at the moment, we've got a very strong commitment to repay over a period of 3 years 2/3 of the council loan. That needs to go through a process. I'm not at liberty for commercial reasons to disclose the source, but we're very confident that $1 million of that loan can be raised through discussions we're having, so that we as trustees, we're all professionals in our own roles. We know what the responsibilities, duties, obligations are on trustees. We're very conscious of that. We're conscious of reputational risk. We don't go into these things lightly, and we are putting in place things now which will secure the repayment of these loans down the track. The problem we've got is that we have a very small window for Christchurch to get the benefit of this Cricket World Cup. I think we've done pretty amazingly, really, approaching people over a Christmas period, getting $1.3 million in cash, not the $3,000 that you referred to in your paper. We have the pledges and those funds in hand. People have been very generous, and we're continuing with that avenue as well.
Thank you. Melanie.
So I have a couple of questions for John, and then one for the Cricket Trust. So one, and one of these is quite minor, it's just for my understanding, it's just disappeared. You've got about the interest rate being at the council's cost of borrowing plus 20 basis points. I was just wondering where that comes from. Like, why the 20 basis points? I had to look that up online to find out what that is.
Yeah. Good question. That comes firstly from a desire to ensure that there's no cost to the ratepayer. So our costs of borrowing plus a small margin are applied, so there's no risk of not charging enough. 20 basis points was chosen as it was as close as possible to council's cost of borrowing, which meant that we were not imposing an additional interest rate onto the trust or any other community group at so only the council's costs of borrowing were covered, not an additional interest rate. The council are not making on the deal, but neither are we putting the council at risk. So it was that balancing act, and that was done in discussion with the council's financial management unit on the best way to get that middle ground.
Great. And then, so the interest is to be paid yearly, as you've talked about, and then the principal repaid at the end of the loan. Or before.
Yep.
But so that was of interest to me, because when you pay back, I mean, the only thing I can relate it to is a mortgage,
Yep.
and you pay your principal back, obviously, with increasing amounts throughout the term of the loan. So why is it done in this way?
Yeah, it's in everyone's interest to pay back the loan as quickly as possible. And the fact that interest will be compounding through the loan is a good incentive to do that. The reason that the proposed structure is how it is to give the trust the maximum degree of flexibility to repay and to seek support from others. So perhaps when the trust has negotiations with its guarantor, the trust will be in a better position with terms and conditions such as this, repay the principal at the end. They may get a more favourable response there. So it really is to give the trust more flexibility, but at the same time ensure that there is no risk to the community, the ratepayer on that.
So I've got two more, one more for John, sorry. And this is more on that again, it's again back to the 4 years. So why 4 years? And I guess your answer is going to be the same. But obviously the Women's World Cup is next year, not in 3 years.
Again, really good question. 4 years was the amount indicated in the original application by the trust. When quizzed, it was based on kind of a worst case scenario on when they expected to repay. So not putting anyone under undue pressure, but not having it go on for much longer. So it really was at the behest of the trust, and perhaps someone from the trust could provide further information if you'd like.
From our perspective, we want to retire this debt as soon as possible. We're only taking this debt because of the time frame incurred. We ended up with that pavilion at $10.5 million cost with no debt. And as I say, I'll speak to the underwriter in a minute. We'd raised all but $400,000 of that underwrite. It was forgiven gratuitously. We don't want this debt sitting there. We want a debt-free facility, but we need to raise this money urgently. The opening of Cricket World Cup is on Wednesday. The announcement will be on Wednesday. I know what those announcements are, confirming the games. So we need to be sure that we can do this, and this gives us a way of doing this in that time frame.
So that really is my question, that really, that you're, it seems to me, and let me know if this is right or wrong, that you're looking for, the Canterbury Cricket Trust is looking for a loan really as security to make sure you are able to purchase them beforehand, rather than... Yeah,
we're about to sign, subject to all of this, a procurement and installation contract for those lights. We've been in discussions with the contractors since November. We've been given very favourable terms. For example, the electrical contractor a local contractor who's assisting with the installation has given us fantastically favourable terms for payment. So we're trying to do this in the shortest possible time. We want to get these lights up and running and operational by the first week in October. This loan just gives us the ability to proceed. But our priority will be to repay and retire this loan as soon as possible.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Now, I've been asked to make clear that Anne Galloway is also sitting back from this discussion and has noted a conflict. And thank you for reminding us of that. So that's Anne and Tim both sitting back from the table for this discussion and decision. Thank you. Further questions? Jimmy.
Regarding the terms of reference of the loan repayment, whether each trustee of the Canterbury Cricket Trust will be undersigned or endorsed on those terms of reference or not?
Usually loan documentation for a trust such as this, and I don't know their constitution, is approved by a decision of the trust, and they usually delegate the chair to sign. Was that your question? Yeah.
To put the question a different way, presumably we know from the papers that the other party to the loan is the trust as an entity, and not the trustees of the trust as individuals.
Yeah. Yes. We'd be loaning. It's proposed that we loan to the Canterbury Cricket Trust, not to individuals.
Yeah. Thank you. Yanni.
What's the LGFA borrowing rate for council?
In the report, it varies. It's probably going down. But I think the report differentiates between fixed and flexible, and if you just bear with me for a couple of minutes, hopefully less.
Oh yeah, sorry, it is here.
Is it, yeah,
1.9 and 2.25.
read it so many times I'm going blind.
So we would be going with the
20 basis points over that,
plus 2.
plus 20 basis points. So the actual interest rate will be slightly over 2%.
Oh, so are we going on a fixed? We're going on a fixed.
We would, the financial management team would look at the best terms and conditions on the moment and go with that.
But surely, like the repayment schedule and that ability, we've just heard. You know, obviously, the Cricket Trust doesn't want to have debt, so I'm presuming that we go with the floating.
I'm probably not the best person to answer the complexities of council borrowing. What I can say that with all of our loans, the council will borrow on the very best and appropriate terms of conditions at the moment, and then on loan.
So,
that's exactly what we do.
So the money that we've currently got sitting in the community loan scheme under 4.3, which you've made available, is that currently money that's borrowed?
We're not proposing to source this from the community loan scheme. However, I can say that the community loan scheme, there's no pool of money that we lend out. For the community loan scheme, council will take a loan and on loan that to the recipient of the community loan scheme. It's not like a capital endowment fund where we have an endowment fund, we have interest, we have money and we allocate it. We take a loan and on loan. That's
So
how
I guess what I'm trying to kind of understand is why we would have a different scheme for cricket than all the other community organisations that have come to us who,
Okay,
if they
I'll
see
get that.
this, would be
Yep.
paying about 2% more
Yeah.
or 2.5% more
Yeah.
than
Okay.
what
Yeah.
cricket are paying.
Yeah, the council has a community loan scheme. The reasons, and they're detailed in the report, why we chose not to recommend that are one, and probably the most important one, there are a number of organisations who have expressed an interest and we're working with at the moment to take advantage of that. And if we sourced all of this money through that avenue, it would exhaust the fund, precluding others from doing it. Secondly, the community loans pool, if you like, tends to offer smaller loans. Where council has offered a larger loan to groups like the Piano or the Isaac Theatre Royal, they are general loans. That's why we're coming to this forum. I'm talking a general loan, not a community loan, and I think that's alluded to in the report.
Okay, so if we were worried the signal that this sends to other community groups, we could change our community loan scheme to basically be on the same sort of arrangement.
Yeah, as I alluded to council possibly in the recent past, it is our intention through the Sarah, what's your committee called? Yeah. Yeah, we would want to put a report to that committee with financial services, asking the committee to look at the interest rate charged on community loans, principally because when the policy was set, the interest rates were here, now they're a bit lower. So I think your committee can expect that, Sarah, but we're not in a position to discuss it here. This is a specific loan application for a purpose, and it's...
but it's one of the options that's
further.
been presented. And, so it's an option that we could go with.
I believe that they go with, we're presenting some recommendations to this committee. How this committee chooses to proceed is really up to the committee.
Indeed.
Can I just check on a few other things? One is, in terms of the pavilion, we heard that obviously, and again, I'd support Councillor McDonald, it'd be really good to see the forecast, the cash flow, the business kind of plan. But we heard that some of the income comes from pavilion rental hospitality. My understanding is VBase runs that facility at a loss. We've previously had reports around...
When I meant cash flow, it was more just to get an assurance from the staff that they had considered the ability to them to repay it.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried about going into the detail of it, but just to demonstrate they looked at it.
I'd also be wary of looking at V-Base's operations there, which are completely separate from any considerations of the trust's.
Also, what I'm trying to understand though is what we've heard just today around the Cricket Trust's ability to pay is based on pavilion rental and hospitality, which I presume occurs at the pavilion that V-Base operate. So I'm just trying to understand in terms of the pavilion, are we operating that on a cost recovery basis, or are we running it as a loss or a profit?
I'll answer the first bit and then ask a member of the trust to answer the second.
Great.
The V-Base operating model is not in any way part of the loan application, so we're really not here to talk to that. And I can reiterate that V-Base have not been part of the application or have reviewed it in any way. From my perspective as a council officer, questions on V-Base profitability, cash flow, are better addressed to V-Base themselves. That's my component. Trevor, would you like to?
Okay.
Yeah, just to jump in, and Dawn has also asked to do the same. What we're concerned with here is the loan application, and any concerns, any financial concerns, would be around the trust's ability to repay the loan. V-Base's operation and V-Base's financial situation are completely different matters. So thanks for that comment. Now, Dawn, you asked to make some comments as well.
To reiterate, Chair, you are exactly right. And second, for councillors, the financial services area of our business, along with our community side, have assessed this application. They have done the detailed analysis with evidence provided by the applicant as to whether this is a fit for purposing that we can recommend. I don't think it's appropriate for members to be going right down to each individual line. If you have a governance perspective of concern, that's your role. It is not to do the work of the finance
Fine, because
department.
maybe I didn't articulate it clear enough. What we heard just in one of the questions, which wasn't a question that I asked, was that part of the way in which this loan will be serviced was from pavilion rental and hospitality. What I've seen previously in regards to the pavilion, in terms of council incurring an ongoing operational cost, is something that concerns me, because if we're making decisions in regards to the future of V-Base and how it operates, and want to have cost recovery, that could impact on the ability for the trust to pay the loan. So
Well,
that's why I was trying to understand what that position was.
Just going back to the comment that the Chief Executive has made, the financial robustness of the trust, if that is affected in any way by the contract between the trust as the owner of the pavilion and V-Base as the operator of the pavilion, I'm sure that would have been taken into account in any due diligence that our staff have done in assessing this application. And the nature of the contract between V-Base and the trust is quite different than V-Base's ability to turn a surplus in their operation there.
Well, then it should be a easy question to answer, I would have thought.
I think the answer's already been provided.
I can just add some clarity for that. V-Base and the Cricket Trust have a contractual arrangement to run the pavilion.
Yes.
So there is an arrangement that in place. The Cricket Trust has a business and it needs income to operate. That's what that $40,000 that I referred to in terms of pavilion rental relates to. It has no relationship whatsoever with the contractual arrangement between the trust and V-Base.
So there's no risk.
So we need revenue to run our business, just like any other business. That's what this determines, and there is a separate contractual arrangement with V-Base that operates very well in terms of Hagley Oval and also of the pavilion. They are two separate matters.
Right, so just so I'm really clear, there's no risk to the V-Base contract with the Cricket Trust in terms of the ability for the trust to repay the loan. So if that's renegotiated or changed, it's not going to impact on the ability for the trust to...
Well, I'm surprised to hear you saying it's renegotiated
No,
and changed. We have an arrangement for 10 years in place that is rock solid, so I'm not quite sure what you're wanting to change.
It was if, I said if, so it's...
Yeah, well,
it's
I'm
not
saying if you want to change it, there's a rock solid agreement.
Committed for 10 years. Right, cool.
Thank you. Any further questions, Yanni? No. Done? Okay, so Are there any further questions around the table? Carol would like to make a comment. Yep.
Look, I'd just like to reinforce that one of the conditions that is in this recommendation is that the loan is secured or guaranteed. So a lot of the concerns that are being raised, provided we've got a rock solid security or guarantee, are actually irrelevant.
So, Sam, you're happy to move this as the recommendation as it is? All right. So that's moving the staff recommendation
Happy
as
to
it stands. Seconded, James Goff. Is there any debate? Okay, so Sam's indicated that he's moving the recommendation without that additional wording, and it's been seconded on that basis. If somebody wanted to move an amendment to put the additional wording in, I mean, if there is a view that we want greater involvement and greater oversight of that guarantee than this resolution provides for, then that would lead to an amendment for the chair. Well, the suggestion was for the chair and deputy chair of this committee to sign off on that, obviously on advice from staff.
It's just that the way that number 2A is worded, conditions acceptable to the council, but the number 3 delegates authority to the head of community sport governance and partnerships. So to make arrangements to implement the resolution, not to follow through on. Yeah.
We have got the
and to ensure the terms and conditions and to ensure the terms and conditions are acceptable to council.
Yeah, but how does he know if it's acceptable to council? Just a little bit of.
The PX.
It's not a big thing.
Yeah, the PX item should be pretty clear on that anyway. So.
If people are not comfortable with the resolution the way it stands, it would require someone to move an amendment with that additional.
I'd be more comfortable if you just added the little sign off from you and Andrew, or from Andrew and Dawn. Or just Dawn.
Well, why don't I then, in that case?
Okay, well, add it in.
Okay, I've got some wording here in case we needed it.
I don't care
it's easier.
Yeah, if it makes it easier getting it through.
All right. So at the end of number 3, comma. So comma after council, except in respect of clause 2A. Delegates authority to the chair and deputy chair of the Finance and Performance Committee.
Thanks.
Which obviously means that staff will do the work that was originally envisaged in 3, but there's that additional sign-off.
It'd be great, thanks. Yeah.
So, Sam, you're comfortable with that? Yeah, sure. James, you're comfortable with that? Yeah, great. So we've now got a resolution as amended in front of us. Is there any debate? So there is. Sam?
Yeah, I mean, look, in my view, I think the council, if we supported this today, would be really pragmatic. It's a risk-free loan, essentially, and I think we need to get that into the back of our minds. I think that this is one of those really good examples where we can enable Christchurch, and from my point of view, we would be really foolish not to back them. I think we've got real comfort from what Dawn, John and the Trust have said in terms of their ability to manage cash flow over the next few years. And the reality is we are effectively clipping the ticket on the way through with the basis point. And so in my view, this would be the best loan in town to give out, and I think we should all support it today.
Thank you. James?
Yep, completely agree. Look, I've said many times that I think council's at its best when it's enabling those in the community to do great things, and that's a lot more compelling when that can be achieved with little to no risk to the ratepayer. So what we have in front of us maximises the benefit and equally mitigates any cost and risk to the ratepayer. So when factoring risk versus reward, I would be absolutely astounded if anyone could find fault with this.
Thank you. The positive benefits of this have been made clear through the presentation and the various questions and answers. The context in which we're working is that the Section 71A process has run its course, and there was opportunity for input into that. And the lease process has also run its course, and there was a consultation on that and the opportunity for input, and obviously 2 decisions which have already been made, which are the context in which we're now working. My concerns here that this would be done in a way that there was no cost to ratepayers and that there's no risk to ratepayers. I'm comfortable that the 1A, B, C deal with the no cost to ratepayers aspect. and I'm comfortable that the clauses 2A, B, C deal with the no risk to ratepayers, both part of that, the concern. And we've now got a really good belt and braces approach through clause 3, which has now got governance sign-off, as well as obviously the process that was originally envisaged that officials will work through as part of their due diligence. So with all of that in place, I'm now comfortable with this, realising that there are certain conditions that will need to be met to the satisfaction of council, and I think that's the key, to our satisfaction before anything actually occurs. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? So 1 vote against. Melanie? That's carried. Thank you. And thank you to members of the Trust for making themselves available to provide what were quite detailed answers to questions as well. Thank you. So that now brings us to